Beautiful souls, welcome. I hope you guys are having an amazing, amazing day. I think we are live now. Just check. Sure, we are live. Welcome. I'm going to go ahead and share this stream. And if you find value in, if you guys find value in any of these videos, if they are helping you in any way, please do so. Share them. You can like and you can subscribe. Let me send out a little shout out to everyone. Hold on. Good evening. Hello. Welcome. Angel, so good to see you. All right, beautiful souls. So we got a lot to talk about today because this is one of the most exciting parts of our shadow work. I know I probably say that. You probably hear me say that a lot. You know what? I just love this whole thing. Okay. It's so great to see you, and I'm excited to share this part of our healing journey, our deep dive into the shadow work, which is, one of the most profound elements of spiritual awakening, spiritual integration, psychological integration, inability to have a healthy life, to thrive in your life, to be in peace and come into deepest harmony, come into harmonic order, without the shadow work, you literally can't access any of that, right? So the whole point of this challenge is that we ground ourselves and bring ourselves back into a really deep reconnection with the basics. What is shadow work? How does it work? What are the ins and out of it? How do we process every step of the shadow, from the awareness into the deep realization to the alchemy, right? So all of this is about that internal alchemy, emotional alchemy. And as you know, my passion is to combine the science, and we're looking at the biology, the chemistry, the bioelectrical aspect, the energetic aspect, because everything is interconnected. Nothing is separate. And the more we understand that, the easier it's going to be to integrate all of these parts. And also you're going to know what you're doing in your sessions when you're actually doing the work. You'll understand why certain things come up. You'll understand why certain body parts feel a certain way when you're processing an emotion, and so on. So today's topic is extremely important because we are talking about processing emotions. Okay, so what does it mean to process an emotion? This is the number one question that I get. Other than what is shadow work, is how do you process an emotion? Because even though it seems like something that is so simple, so easy, so should be common knowledge to know how to process an emotion, we've never received any education around getting to understand our emotions. We've never understood, that entire process. And that's something that really should be taught in school. It should be taught in school to understand how to identify an emotion, acknowledge emotions, how to name our emotions. Okay, sometimes we don't even know how to put a name to an emotion. That's a big deal because in this universe, in this entire construct of co-creation, we create with our words that we speak, we create with our emotions, we create with our vibrational energy. And whatever is informing those creations, if it's confusion, if it's disconnect, if it's disassociation, if we miss the connection between any one of those parts, mind, body, and soul, because there's no separation, this is where we start to feel very disconnected from the body, disconnected from our divine essence. And essentially, we end up feeling very lost, very confused. And this is how we eventually we come deeper into the separation from harmonic order. We come deeper into the separation from our divine essence, our connection to source, our embodiment as source. So this is really important in this process of deep internal work that we start to really get to know these very important elements of healing, of deep shadow work, so that we demystify these parts, right? This is not something that is hidden knowledge. It's not something that is fearful to share or to teach. This is actually essential. It's essential for our understanding of who we are, and it's essential for our creation. Okay. All right. So, that being said, today we're talking about the emotions. And when I talk about processing emotions, this is the single most foundation for the cultivation of intuitive faculties. Okay. We might not realize it, but if you lack emotional intelligence, if you lack awareness of emotions, if your emotional library is very small, so is your connection to the non-physical elements of yourself. And you are more non-physical than you are physical, because everything that you're driving your bioelectrical inputs into the system of creation, your intentions, your subconscious is actually what's creating our life experiences. It's extremely inputting, it's influencing, it's directly co-creating with your life experiences. So if you're disconnected from that process, that's why it's so difficult for us to understand how to co-create, how to manifest. Okay. And the emotional engine, the emotions are literally, as I will discuss in a presentation, is that emotions are it's energy. As they say, emotion, energy in motion. It is the movement of life force. It is a bioelectrical charge, and it's interconnected with your organs. It's interconnected with your chemistry, the biochemistry, which is one of the most powerful inputs in intuitive and psychic creation, are the biochemicals that we produce in the body. Okay. And we don't realize that, but the biochemicals that you produce in the body create a chain reaction into the bioelectrical charge system of the body, not only through the neurons in the brain, but the different chemicals and the way that the different parts of the brain start to light up or shut down. Okay. Like we studied in trauma situations, when we are in fight or flight, certain parts of our brain shut down, certain parts of our brain start to behave overactively. All of that is really interconnected with the other organs of the body. So we have to create a sort of a very deep level of awareness and reconnection with the body, so that we can begin to know these processes very deeply, because part of the cultivation of your higher faculties is 100% dependent on your emotional literacy. Okay. If you cannot name emotions, if you can, and your emotional vocabulary is connected with your intention and vibrational frequency. So, as I have mentioned many times before, one of the most powerful things that I did in the beginning, in my early process, is to grab a dictionary where I had an entire list of all the emotions that I ever knew. Well, emotions I knew and emotions I didn't know. And I would go through that list and feel in my body what those felt like, how I reacted to them, what memories came up, how my body wanted to express them. Okay. And what you might realize is that a lot of our expressions behind our emotions, these are things that we have learned. We learned it from family, learned it from society, from films. A lot of what we are expressing is something that we're just adapting to. Okay. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem, because that's part of the continuation of the matrix. It's the continuing of the indoctrination of the matrix, because if you believe that emotions mean a certain thing, the meaning making, the meaning that we apply to certain emotions is very rigid and very specific. And that specific rigid concept of that emotion has been, it's been supported by many films, many reactions in family conflicts, displays of this emotion across the board, in our culture, in our society. That's going to be embedded in your mind, and none of that is an absolute truth. Okay. And so what happens is that we categorize, based on that understanding, we categorize emotions usually as good and bad. Okay, as we talked about yesterday, we categorize emotions as good and bad based on, what is seen appropriate by society. What is it okay to feel? Is it okay for a man to cry? Is it okay for a man to be emotional? Is it okay for a woman to be angry and express her anger and, rage about something? In our society, we have been told that certain ways of behaving is taboo. Okay. And so the problem with that is that we are compartmentalizing entire systems of deep learning that we need to unpack. And until you sit with that emotion yourself, and until you begin to identify your relationship with those emotions, with that specific emotion, let's say anger in this example, you're not really going to understand what that emotion means to you. And that's really important. That lack of knowledge is really why the majority of us are completely triggered and we are manipulated by our emotions, because we have become ignorant to what our emotions mean to us. And that it's very difficult, because going into that emotion, we have to we believe that we have to fight through all these concepts that we've solidified within ourselves. And so this is the process of learning how to process an emotion is one of the highest acts of self-love. Okay, because your ability to feel your emotions, to connect with your emotions, to come into the authentic, expression and experience of an emotion is a completely different thing than playing out repetitive behaviors that you've learned along with an emotion. Okay, and what you might discover is that what you have been taught about an emotion is not really how you feel. You don't really agree with that. Okay, you don't agree. You realize that you don't agree that your anger is not okay. You don't agree that it's a weapon against you. Okay, you start to really start to know yourself deeply. Okay, and so on the other side of this, that being said, what emotions actually are, once you have expanded your emotional library, is emotions, because the meaning that we apply to them is part of this gigantic library of symbology that we are learning. Okay, so we are symbolic beings. A very interesting trait about the human is that in the deep subconscious, our language, the language of frequency and energy, is based on symbolism. It's the self-organizing manifestation of form into some sort of a symbol, which translates information to us. That's how our organism processes information, how it processes data, right? We see something and we have applied meaning to that for generations in our system. And some of those symbolisms are connected to archetypal overlays, which are part of this matrix, which are part of this universal system of communication. And some of those have very deep primal connections to our origins, So some of those are very close to us and they're deep in our subconscious. We recognize those things very deeply. But through indoctrination, through, continuing taking on this matrix and these false concepts, these inversions of actual natural order and truth, we get confused about what those symbols actually are. And one of the ways that this system reveals true harmonic order is that once you start to correct your perception, you can see the inversion of natural order in everything. You begin to see the symbolism in all things. You symbolism in current events, in the timing of certain events, synchronicities in those events. And it's almost as if there's this little layer, this magical layer that seems to unfold where you begin to see so much synchronicity in everything and how it interconnects with you. That is a very specific cultivation. It's a refinement of a perception that is cultivated over time, that can only be cultivated through shadow work. Okay. Because if you can access some of that understanding through the psychedelics or some kind of ayahuasca or something like this. But the difference between that is the integration and embodiment of that symbology won't connect fully with you. Okay, so it can be used as a tool, but the real integration of your ability to speak the language of frequency, of the symbolic manifestations, of the self-organizing nature of this universe is something that we have to kind of undo within us. We have to undo those tangles of confusion and disconnect until we come back into harmonic order, until we are able to connect back into that divine system of knowing. And what happens when you go through that process, because symbolism and this natural self-organizing system is so powerful, is that your higher faculties, okay? And the connection between emotional processing and the activation of your faculties is synonymous. It's something that happens simultaneous. Okay. One cannot happen without the other. And as we are moving, this is why, contrary to what some people believe, that certain interdimensional beings don't have emotions. That's not true. Most interdimensional beings that operate in other dimensions have already mastered the embodiment and the connection to that kind of symbolic language. So they don't use emotions in the way we do. Humans are very, very dense. We're in a very highly physical dimensional plane where we are designed to feel and experience things. And it's a very difficult dimension to exist in because, not only are we pushed towards becoming interdimensional and non-physical, becoming more aware of our non-physical nature, we have to overcome this illusion that we are only physical nature, only physical. So it's a really powerful alchemical arc that the human is experiencing. In other civilizations that are more advanced, they have learned how to integrate their emotions. Their emotional processing is have become more refined to the point where they are now operating by these higher faculties. And our human race has experienced that level of awareness in other generations of this human earth. And we are headed in that direction now. Okay, we talk about becoming the new human. What does that mean? It is the cultivation, the refinement of your higher faculties, but it's through the emotional body that you refine those senses. Why? Because emotions are vibrational frequency. And the more emotions you know within yourself, the more emotions you learn to integrate within your body. That is how you are expanding your library of symbology. You're expanding your library of your senses, okay? Because all emotions have different reactions in the body. Some emotions we feel in the belly, some emotions we feel it in the heart, some emotions you feel it in your shoulder, some emotions are only captured through hearing, so we have many senses, and something I've been talking about for a very long time is that we don't only have 5 senses. We have actually many, many, many senses. We don't realize that the integration of the nervous system, the regulation of the nervous system unlocks the access into those interdimensional capacities. Okay? Because once the nervous system is regulated, these pathways of communication open up. Okay, they open up, these senses open up, because when your body is contracted and in a constant state of survival, you block the sensitivity to information. right? Because you're in survival. You actually are thinking about protection. You're thinking about bracing. You're thinking about resisting or avoiding. So as long as those are your subconscious programs, you can never access sensitivity. And if you are sensitive, because we are all very, multidimensionally equipped, and we're all very multidimensionally prepared, and we have so many gifts. Um, your filter will be skewed. Okay, so we see that a lot with psychics and beings that are, channeling information, but they're always coming through a very human lens, right? Everything is about war. Everything is about, death. Everything is about separation. And it takes kind of a trained ear to notice that. It takes someone that has seen and embodied unity to be able to even recognize that. Okay. So, however, that unity is intrinsic to us. Okay. Because that's what we are. We come from that. It's just through the matrix that we come programmed into separation, into believing separation is true. Okay. So this is a really important topic because your ability to learn how to process emotions, and also, if I were to invite you to learn one meditation in your entire life that would serve you the most, it's the meditation of learning how to process your emotions. Okay, because you cannot make sense of your life experiences if you don't know your emotions. Your emotions are giving you information. Emotions are pure information, in fact. In our world, which is a very physical, visual, sensory stimulating world, we have been programmed to believe that emotions are about expressions and reactions, right? We talk about actors that learn how to act. And they have to study psychology and emotions and expressions in order to learn how to best translate that feeling, that emote, right? But in reality, emotions are designed to be very briefly in the body, only long enough to provide us with information. It is the user's responsibility to refine their ability to gather the information necessary from an emotion. Okay. So this is a practice that you're not only going to do in a 1 hour sitting. This is the thing that you're doing as you're speaking. So right now I'm speaking to you. Let's say somebody feels anxiety. So acknowledging that anxiety while I'm talking to you, being aware of that, being aware of what's coming up for me. And of course, as you have done your shadow work for a long amount of time, what comes up is no longer going to be overwhelming. It's going to be something you've already met before. You've already kind of dealt with before. So, you understand what need is beneath that. And that's the whole power. The power is that underneath every emotion that you experience, you're able to identify the key information, which is what is the information, what is the need that needs to be met in that moment that is being triggered. We talked about triggers yesterday. Okay, so this is how you create your reality. The creation of reality. Okay, what is reality? This temporary experience, this holographic co-creative projection of experience, excuse me, is sorry, I've been talking all day, is a projection of our core belief systems. Okay. And so as we gently lighten up those layers and layers of perceptions that are clogging our understanding of things, this is where we start to be able to come back into the 0 point of the non-judgmental observer. So, that being said, let me jump into it. Honestly, this presentation has 67 slides. I don't want to go through every single one with you, but I will go over the main ones. And I primarily want to share with you both sides of emotional processing. We're going to learn the biology, energy, and psychology of emotional processing, but we're also going to learn the deeper integration and the outcome of emotional processing. Okay, what does it look like once you have processed the emotions? What is available to you? Okay, because what you're going to learn is that the integration of these emotions is the activation of your higher faculties, and that's really, I guess, why I'm doing this right now in 2026 is that as we move progressively into these next 10 years, these tips and these tools and these practices are going to be absolutely essential for your survival in the coming 10 years, because we are needing to refine our higher faculties for another way of communicating and understanding reality and truth. The way that we perceive reality now is convoluted, it's confused, we don't know what's right, what's wrong. Our ability to discern has been distorted because of our disconnect. So coming into that reconnection once again is really going to be helpful for the coming times. Okay. So the name of this presentation is The Anatomy of an Emotion, because we're going to talk about every single layer of that pertains to emotional processing. And by the end of this presentation, you should know how to process your emotions. Okay. Let me make sure this is where it needs to be. Okay. When we talk about an emotion, as I mentioned, emotion is energy in motion. This is what moves life force. Okay. Every time you feel an emotion, I want you to start to think of yourself as you are moving life force. And the reason I want you to think of it that way is because your emotions are not unimportant. They're not just random. They're not, um, the weight of an emotion in the terms of this world of creation is so powerful. As you know, one of the greatest points of currency in this world is your attention. Wherever your attention is focused, wherever you are investing your emotion, that's the gold. And as you know, social media and all these media systems are designed to capitalize on your attention. Okay, so in the field of consciousness has already reorganized around the emotional event before the label arrives. The reorganization precedes the naming. So emotion must be understood at the level of deeper than feeling. We think of emotion and we think of feeling. We got to feel something. But it's a lot more than that. As I mentioned, it's information. Feeling is what consciousness perceives of a movement already occurring within the organism. By the time one says, I'm afraid, I'm angry, I'm grieving, an entire organization has already taken place. You are moving life force, you are organizing life force, you are directing that. And as soon as you feel an emotion, there's biochemical, bioelectrical, psychological systems, and energetic that are moving. Okay. The body alters as a result of that. Okay. Your muscle tone, the way you're breathing, your respiration, cardiovascular, hormonal signaling, the chemicals in your body. Everything in the biological substrate is already shifting. It's organizing before awareness consciously registers the change. And this is the disconnect. Okay. This happens automatically in the body. So the point of coming into a refined state of emotional awareness is awareness. Awareness is the key. Another layer is that your memory becomes summoned. As soon as you feel an emotion, you start to be flooded with memories. That's a really huge thing that I'm sure you haven't paused to really consider. But relevant archives have become more accessible. The emotional state has already begun selecting its historical evidence before the before the conscious mind constructs its narrative. So this is another powerful thing. We talked about bioelectricity and emotion, but every single memory that's connected to the emotion that you're feeling is going to come to the surface. And this is something that you might not be aware of at first because we're so unaware. We're so unaware of how our body works. We're so unaware of our thoughts that you might not realize that every time you have an emotion, there's a little flash of some little memory, some little feeling, some nostalgia, a song you heard, a feeling, a smell, a certain thought of something that happened. Okay. So this is major point of co-creation. What else happens when you feel an emotion is that you begin to apply meaning. Okay, so life force has taken a particular direction. The appraisal has already occurred, shaping what the event means and how it will be interpreted throughout the psychological continuation. Emotion is therefore not merely something one feels. Emotion is an organization of the being. The vessel through which perception moves must be coherent. Okay, so in order for us to even begin to have any level of mastery over ourselves and over what we're experiencing in life, this connection with your emotions has to be one and the same. Coherence. We come into coherence. And when we talk about coherence, we talk about coming into coherence. Our thoughts, our actions, our emotions, our intentions, our energy are all coherent. Okay. Can you imagine that if you behave that way, if your thoughts, your emotions, your energy, your actions were all coherent, imagine how amazing that would feel in the body, where there is no resistance, there's no wars, there's no internal betrayals with your behaviors and your actions. A person that exists in this constant state of coherence is somebody that is beginning to move life force, directing it into a very powerful co-creative potential. Okay. So let's talk about how emotions are actually bringing life to things. Okay, let's talk. So we talk about what happens when the emotion comes into the body. Now we're directing that emotion outwardly. So life force in itself has no resentment. It has no jealousy, no fear, no grief. These are organizations through which vitality moves once consciousness, memory, biology, and meaning have entered into relationship. Anger. It contains energy, heat, direction, mobilization, a movement towards penetration, separation, defense, or restoration of boundaries. The life force underneath anger is considerably more primordial than the psychological story surrounding it. Let's talk about fear. Gathers, contracts, heightens perception, withdraws energy from the secondary, and organizes the organism around preservation. When within fear may exist exquisite sensitivity to the environment, discernment, orientation, and the instinct for preservation. A woman who says, "My fear makes me weak," has confused the organization with the intelligence beneath it. Let's talk about grief, which reorganizes the field around what has been lost. The life force of grief is the capacity for profound love made visible in absence. When the psychological distortion is understood, the underlying capacity becomes available. One does not destroy the energy, one liberates it from the form through which it became imprisoned. So these are very complex systems of emotions. And our body is actually being shaped by emotions. Okay, we talked a little bit about this in the last few days with different layers of that perception and how those perceptions are created. But attention is the most important currency of inner life. Where attention goes, repeatedly organization follows. A resentment remembered every morning is not merely a thought repeated every morning. An organism enters the architecture of resentment. Okay. And the face changes, the breath changes, muscular tone changes, memory changes, the internal representation of another person becomes vivid, imagination, conversations begin. The event that occurred once now occurs internally hundreds of times. The person says they are taking my energy. Often, the more precise observation is my own attention continues delivering energy to an unresolved internal representation of them. This distinction restores power immediately. The other person may have left years ago. The energetic expenditure remains current, not because they hold power, but because attention has not yet been reclaimed. The implication for practice, this means that working with the attention, learning where it goes, understanding what it is building through its repetitions, and consciously redirecting it. It's among one of the most important forms of inner work available. Attention management is not merely a productivity concept, it's the fundamental discipline of the energy body. Okay, so every single emotion creates this illusion world, temporary world, but it's the matrix. Okay, please understand that the reason why this matrix or this holographic construct of reality and experiential reality is so vivid is because of emotions. In fact, one of the most powerful exercises that I do with students is walking them through the process of death and having them look back at their lives to observe what is the most challenging. What was it that created so much pain and suffering in their life prior to that death moment? And the answer every single time is the meaning that they applied to experiences, how much time and effort they spent applying certain meanings to experiences where, they really didn't have to. It's just a whole lot of time being putting meaning, and the emotions not being controlled, the emotions taking absolute precedence over their ability to just experience everything. Okay. So, and what they realize is that when they have this death experience, their body feels so light, it feels so free, it can move, and it doesn't feel so constricted. When they come back into the body, they begin to feel their body starts to feel heavy, right? All their muscles contracting, the chemicals rushing through the body. When they sustain an emotion for a long amount of time, when they shouldn't be holding an emotion such a long time. Okay, so our emotions create our reality. And I talked a lot about resonance and, how vibrationally we begin to attract people, places, and things that are in alignment with our emotional baseline. Because the emotional baseline is not just a thought form. It's a biochemical, bioelectrical, brainwave states that are a certain level, the contraction in the bodies and the muscles and all the layers of the system. Psychologically, our perception is narrowed based on that vibrational frequency. Our energy body is contracted, or perhaps it's distorted completely. Okay, so as you can see, so much goes into the layers of what you perceive as truth. And if you are someone that is experiencing depression, pain, suffering, traumas, recovering from a loss, we need to learn how the architecture of the body is responding to these emotional states. There are profound responses. Okay. And so if we hold on to these temporary worlds for a very long time, it's a self-reinforcing mechanism, and we begin to see it everywhere. Our perception is changed and it's generated through the states that we cultivate in our body. So emotional processing is, as I mentioned, one of the most important, because if you don't process your emotions fully, you are living in a world that is not real. You're living in a world that you are reinforcing through limiting belief systems. And that of course, on this incredibly, everything in this universe is moving and evolving. Your body, which is a toroidal energy system, becomes sluggish, stagnant, and eventually starts to oxidize, going towards the direction of death. And that is the difference between co-creation and, counter creation, which we're going in the direction of death. Our body slowly dies. Our energy systems start to get disconnected, our emotions, our consciousness gets disconnected. When we disconnect from the infinite source, this is where we start to believe this temporary perceptual world that we ourselves have created. Okay. So let's talk about the creation of an emotion. Okay. What is the process of creating an emotion in the body? Number one, we have a stimulus, right? Something is occurring externally, and so it begins to create a stimulus. It's a trigger. And a person can look away, a memory appears, a sensation enters the body, a thought arises, a possibility is imagined. Whatever the stimulus might be through the senses, once again, I will pay attention to that, because the reason why emotions are the key to the cultivation of higher faculties is that emotions take up all the senses in the body to process data. Okay. We then, create a perception, the sensory registration of stimulus. We register all the things that were stimulated. And once we register those things, and that's completely dependent on how aware you are, by the way. Okay. And some of these processes are subconscious. Okay. We apply meaning, right? So we appraise this stimulation, we appraise what is occurring, we assess significance and meaning. This is really the key. If I could just highlight how important this appraisal part is, because again, your appraisal is coming from everything you know. This is your holographic DNA, everything ancestrally that you've inherited down your father's mother lineage, everything that you've learned to become, everything that you've, took on from social engineering, the matrix, whatever. All of these belief systems are completely building this appraisal system. And so the majority of us, our appraisal system is quite distorted or incomplete at best. Okay. And from there, we start to take actions, right? Our actions or the impulse of the good. This is where it turns from over here. This is a magnificent bioelectrical process here. Okay, that we create this stimulation, which is a movement in the field, then moves through the non-physical systems of creation, then creating this bioelectrical charge, and that bioelectrical charge then turns into an action, an impulse, okay? And we have a tendency to respond behaviorally, right? So, when you are having this, this is happening in faster than light, right? All of these processes, these incredibly complex processes are happening faster than light, but the amount of life force that is engaged, the amount of your systems that are engaged in the creation of an emotion is tremendous. Okay. And so from here, we start to move psychological mobilization. Okay. We have autonomic, we have neural, endocrine, muscular systems begin preparing the organism. Your heart rhythm changes, breathing changes, muscle tone changes. Your attention begins to reorganize, hormonal and neurotransmitter signaling shifts. Okay. And then we go to the sensation body, the senses. Okay. Consciousness begins perceiving as a biological event. Pressure in the chest, heat in the face, contraction. Let's say something embarrassing happened, right? So you start to feel ashamed. Your face starts to turn red. It blocks out some of your sensory systems, and then it heightens others of your sensory systems. Okay, so your feeling systems become organized. Whether you're feeling anger, fear, grief, joy, shame, we start to name and categorize what we're experiencing. And then we interpret, right? The critical transition here is when we start really beginning to interpret the experience. We categorize or we compartmentalize it as good or bad, or, however, we are going to be compartmentalizing it based on our perception. Okay. So I'm angry because, and here the original emotional event begins acquiring a narrative. This is where emotions begin its transformation from biological signaling to psychological story. Now, the sensation isn't yet a story. A raw sensation is where you are still in the moment, where you can actually cultivate awareness. But this is usually the part where, because we're so disconnected from ourselves, we immediately go into the fight, flight, or freeze response. Okay, so the distinction of one of the central teachings is that before an emotion becomes psychological, it is profoundly embodied. Okay, what raw sensation actually is. Before thought names it, there may be only heat or pressure or movement or contraction, activation, heaviness, trembling, or an impulse towards an action. The biological substrate of emotion is simpler and more immediate than its psychological continuation. Okay, the layering process, then thought names it. Okay, we have a tendency to want to name. The memory contextualizes it. Identity claims it. Okay, so it could be, in that example of feeling shame in that moment, immediately you start to trigger all of the belief system of, oh, I am unworthy in that moment. I'm unworthy, or I'm not good enough. So I created this embarrassing situation. So we might experience several seconds of this psychological fear, followed by hours of thinking about fear. The biological event and the psychological continuation are fundamentally different phenomena operating on different time scales. Okay. I mentioned a lot about how we are constantly moving through many dimensions. And this is one of the layers that I mean. And I'm so happy to be able to express it in this way through the science and the biological connection between sensory creation and what we're experiencing. Okay. So in this practice, learning to remain with raw sensation before interpretation is profoundly revealing. This is the key, guys. This is the key. Okay. So in order to learn how to process emotions fully, we need to be able to be okay with, what color should I do this? Oh, okay. The whole point of learning to process an emotion, this is step number one. And trust me, we'll go through this in different layers. So with the raw sensation, sitting with the raw sensation before you interpret it. Okay. Again, as I was mentioning at the beginning, our interpretation can be very limited. Okay. Now, what happens once we have applied a meaning to an emotion is that we start going into the action of it, right? And so emotions prepare organisms for relationships with reality. They are not simply states to be managed. They are intelligent mobilization of the organism. The question becomes not why am I feeling this, but rather what is the emotion attempting to accomplish? Fear, for example, it's preparing protection or escape. Disgust produces rejection or withdrawal. Curiosity can organize exploration, extending the field of consciousness towards the unknown. Anger can mobilize confrontation and boundary defense. Grief can reorganize us around loss. Okay, we might be asking consciousness to acknowledge irreversible changes. Affection facilitates approach and connection, organizes the organism towards intimacy. Okay, so I just want you to kind of observe for a moment a little bit about some of the emotions that you've been feeling today. And just kind of take a moment to look and see, how do you immediately, what are your impulses when you feel certain emotions that are strongest for you? Okay. Let's talk about the process of an emotion. Okay. What is the entire full process and what does it actually mean? I'm going to break it down, not only here, but we're going to go a little deeper into this. Processing an emotion does not mean endlessly expressing it. It doesn't mean endlessly feeling it in the body over and over again. It doesn't mean resisting it. Okay. It means allowing sufficient contact with the emotional event for its information to become available without permitting the state to unconsciously determine behavior. This is the true definition of emotional processing. Okay, so we go from activation to awareness. Then we go from activation to embodiment. Okay, we feel it in the body. And then we go to awareness, and then we go to integration. Okay, a mature cycle in practice is that you feel the emotion, you remain in contact with the body. And this is the part that most people have a really hard time doing, especially if you're empathic, especially if you have extrasensory abilities. You tend to want to check out of the body because everything feels like too much. And the reason why it feels like too much is because you lack the mastery to really cultivate the refinement of your senses. Okay, so we want to be absolutely in contact with the body because the body is the sacred vessel of the infinite potential. It is the sacred vessel of the divine. You distinguish sensation from interpretation. You recognize the need or information contained within it. Okay, so whatever the emotion is, you're distinguishing sensation from interpretation. So, you feel afraid, but your interpretation is that you're in danger. And when you start to separate those things, you realize, oh, wait, I am afraid, but I'm not really in danger at this moment. Okay, that's an example. And you recognize the need. Okay, so in that moment, the need can be for me to feel safe. What do I need? Information is that I am feeling unsafe. I need to feel safe. You determine whether action is necessary. Is it necessary for me to lash out at this dark shadow that is standing next to me? Right? Or whatever it is that triggered the stimulation that caused that fear. And you act proportionally where appropriate. So what happens when we have very little emotional intelligence, emotional cultivation, is that we instinctively react before we have processed an emotion. And this is where a lot of energy expenditure occurs. Not only that, but we are really in trouble where we begin to shift and disassociate. And then we are confused later on. The organism returns toward baseline. Okay, so this is really important, guys, that once you feel an emotion and you have identified the need, the information necessary, you can bring yourself back into baseline. Why? Because emotion is not designed for you to feel continuously for a long amount of time. In fact, when you learn how to observe your emotions in the body, the information comes up in a second, and it comes and it's very light. It's very light. It's not information that is super vivid or, unless you practice. And that is the mature cycle of an emotional processing. Really quickly, what emotion isn't. Okay, processing is not suppression. It's not refusing to feel, super important. It is not catharsis alone. Discharging without integration. It is not rumination, returning repeatedly to the story. Okay, a lot of people do this. They have a traumatic experience and they want to keep going back to the story. And the reason why we keep going back to our story over and over and over again is because a couple of reasons. First of all, one of them is that, again, we have not come in contact with the body and the emotion. That has felt like a threat. Sometimes we go through really traumatic experiences and it doesn't feel safe to be in the body, doesn't feel safe to feel anything. If you come from an abusive relationship, you have gaslighting, you have people telling you that what you feel isn't real, which is one of the most damaging things that you can do to someone or someone can do to you, because the person completely disconnects from their ability to, author their experience. Okay, demonstrating emotion for social purposes, it's not performance. Okay, how many of you find yourself performing emotions? Perhaps you have demonstrations of an emotion, like somebody gives you a gift and it's something you already have, but you demonstrate, this kind of behavior that's not 100% authentic for social purposes, okay? Rather than being authentic. So this is the real alchemy. The alchemy is, can you be close to yourself enough to train yourself? In addition to returning to baseline that we talked about here, it's coming back into that holding space for authenticity. Okay. The aim is completion and reorganization. The emotion moves through the entire arc, delivers its information, and the organism returns to a state capable of receiving the next moment freshly. This is what it means to be in the present moment. Okay? If there was a psychological, biological definition of being in the present moment, it would be this. Because every moment we have stimulation, every moment we have something that is triggering something within us. Emotions, we go through thousands of emotions through the day, both conscious and unconscious. And to be able to be present in the moment is for you to be absolutely aware of each emotion that arises and falls within the body. Where emotional cycle becomes interrupted. The root of fragmentation. So what happens? We talked about fragmentation, that when we feel an emotion and we are disconnected from truly the body and feeling the emotion, or someone says that's not really what's happening as a child. And so you begin to fragment your experience. You fragment your identity, you fragment your experience, and you begin to compartmentalize different parts of yourself. This is where we start to have an issue. And the root of that fragmentation, imagine, for example, anger arising in a child. The organism mobilizes, but anger threatens attachment. The parent withdraws love. Whenever anger appears, the child encounters an impossible conflict. My organism says no. My attachment says I should never say no. Okay, so when we have these dissociative conflicts with our external, especially as a child, and we become enmeshed with the parent, it's very difficult for us to individuate into our deep connection and knowing. That's why meditation and reconnection to yourself is so vital as at any age of your life, as soon as you can. Okay. The division that it forms is, one part is the one that is experiencing what's happening. Another part prohibits the experience. Another monitors the prohibition. Another develops a personality capable of maintaining that arrangement. Okay, so this is where we start to really fragment ourselves into different kinds of, personalities and perceptions of ourselves, which are all fighting against our authentic truth. And so truth becomes dangerous. We are growing with the concept that our authenticity and our truth is a flaw. It is a dangerous thing. Okay. And the division becomes invisible, not only to others, but to the person themselves. This is the biggest thing, is that you don't realize how you are doing this within yourself. Okay. The shadow is filled with life force. All these little compartmentalized parts are completely holding our life force. For example, the anger that we have rejected as that child is holding our authority. Okay, the force that cannot be expressed becomes the capacity for decisive action, boundary setting, and courageous engagement with reality. The rejected selfishness becomes self-preservation. The legitimate need to honor one's own requirements and limits previously forbidden as selfish becomes the capacity for genuine self-care and boundary. Okay. Rejected grief equals depth of love. The capacity to care profoundly, previously concealed within grief, reveals itself as the measure of genuine love and connection. Rejected sexuality is our creative life force, as I've said many times. The creative and generative vitality that could not be owned becomes available as artistic energy, passionate engagement, and life-giving presence. Rejected arrogance is holding our dignity, the sense of one's own value, legitimate authority, previously disguised as arrogance, becomes genuine dignity without the distortion of grandiosity. The shadow is a repository for your unlived life, for your life force and your potential. And the reason why we want to get to this data by processing an emotion fully, as we mentioned before, is that we regain our self-authority, we regain our depth of love, our preservation, our dignity, our creativity, our intimacy, our ability to connect, is all within the process of gathering the information of those deep, deep emotional wounds. The fragmentation that occurs through trauma is also holding your life force. There's an energetic cost, and that's, first of all, that you become very depleted from your life force, but your toroidal system is moving centrifugally. Okay, all the energy is depleted into the other, maintaining and sustaining the structure that we created with the other. Okay, so much energy is depleted through this continuous loop of depletion. Let's talk about what happens when we create an emotional shadow. Okay. Couple things that occur is that we learn certain behaviors that we continue to repeat in our lives, which then eventually becomes an identity. Okay. So, for example, in the process of feeling an anger, we learn when we're kids that anger is dangerous. We have a need for weakness. Fear is shameful. Desire is selfish. Sexuality is dangerous. Grief is unbearable. Power causes rejection. Visibility attracts attack. Okay, so we learn all of these inversions of our authentic experience with certain experiences. And so what happens? The individual eventually says, I never get angry. I never get angry. Are you that person that says, oh, I never get angry? Are you the person that never shows your emotion of anger? Okay, well, it's not a good thing. When someone says that, then I know for sure that there's a suppression of some other aspect of themselves. The body may remain chronically contracted. The jaw remains tight. Resentment appears indirectly. Boundaries become confused. Passive aggression develops. And it persists. What happens with someone that is constantly passive aggressive, their boundaries are confused, they can't speak their truth because they have learned expressing that anger is taboo. And so it becomes a persistent. Exhaustion follows constant accommodation. The emotion has disappeared from the conscious identity while its organization remained active, shaping choices, relationships, psychology from beneath the threshold of awareness. The shadow is not just darkness, it's the repository of, once again, your life force, your creative potential. So, how many of you have these conflicting beliefs about emotions? Put it in the chat. What emotion have you been told is not okay, and how has it affected you in your life? What have you adapted to as a result of being told that this one emotion, whatever it is, I want you to share, is not okay? Okay. Stagnation. When an emotion cannot complete its function, literally, these unfinished emotions creates blockage in the body, bioelectrically, energetically, emotionally, physically. And so it never completes the full cycle. And what happens is that we store this. If we could insert, I forget what number day it was, where we talked about the bioelectrical system, the stagnation and the blockage of those thought forms inside the field become reinforced over and over and over again. It becomes a literal packet of energy physically trapped in the tissue. Unresolved emotional learning can maintain recurring patterns of autonomic activation, muscular garden, avoidance, rumination, attention bias, and behavioral inhibition. Energetically, this is the experience of as stagnation in the body, the energy body, which eventually causes illnesses. Okay. Identification. This is super important because this is where all of these processes begin to manifest into the identities that we then show the world. Okay. The central mechanism of emotional possession. What do I mean by emotional possession? You become possessed by your emotions. Your emotion, as a result of trauma, becomes your baseline. Okay. The baseline is not the 0 point, which is infinite potential. It's fear, or it's anger, or it's resentment. Okay. And so let's talk about in stages how this becomes reality. Number 1, observation. Anger is present in the body. Consciousness observes the state. Space remains between the observer and the observed. The emotion is a weather pattern passing through awareness. Okay. 2, identification. I'm angry. Consciousness identifies with the state. The observer has merged with the observer. The space collapses. The emotion has become the temporary center from which everything is organized. And stage 3, reality construction. I'm right because I'm angry. The state begins constructing reality itself. Reason is recruited into the service of the emotion. The intellect imagines itself objective while serving an emotional sovereign. So this is really, really tricky. And this is what we do in DNA reprogramming. We really focus on getting to the underlayers of your belief systems. A lot of people come into a session with very strong beliefs about events that happen to them, only to later find that the entire personality that they built around that belief was built on sand, built on something that is not 100% truth. And the shift of that perception liberates them from having to live in a construct that they created. Okay. In a psychological sense, the emotion has become the temporary center from which perception is organized. Nothing supernatural is required to explain its essential structure. The fragment has temporarily required the resources of the whole. Thought, memory, imagination, physiology, language, attention, and finally, identity itself. You become what you believe. Okay, and so a lot of people have constantly repeating certain behaviors in their life, certain scenarios. They keep coming into the same pattern with relationships. It's the same abusive relationship or the same emotionally unavailable relationship or whatever it is. You repeat those same patterns because you believe your entire emotional construct is built on these things that you have experienced in your life. Here's a really interesting element that we start getting into the non-physical. So you see how we're going from, the biochemical, emotional embodiment, thought forms into the physical identity, the psychological identity, into memory. Okay. Once a strong emotional state dominates consciousness, memory does not retain neutral. It doesn't remain neutral. The present state begins assembling historical evidence for itself, selectively retrieving what confirms its reality and rendering contradictory evidence harder to access. Anger recruits. Previous offenses become more and more accessible. Past violations rise to the surface. The mind compiles a case. Compiles a case. Historical grievances join the present charge. When we don't process an emotion, it has completely become an identity. It has become your entire survival mechanism to the point that all of these memories are raw in your space. And this is really interesting energetically. The way that this looks like in and energetically in somebody's body is, first of all, they'll have some kind of physical ailment. Okay, it could be a body ache or pain or some kind of other physical illness or something that is deeply connected with a certain side of the body, female or masculine, right? The feminine and masculine energies of their body. And immediately it's connected to an archetypal, person or role in their life. So it could be the mother or the father. And all of these memories that are connected to that father, okay, are just accumulated in their field in more than one dimensional layer, okay, through all the chakra system. And you trigger, you tell them one thing or you trigger one thing, and it starts to bring up all of those memories come back. Oh, my father did this and he did that and he did this and he was this. And, all my life I was violated and my boundary was crossed. Okay, so the problem with that is that, again, you are living in a false construct that does not exist in this present moment. The emotion very much exists in this present moment because you haven't processed the emotion. And the emotion becomes the reason behind feeling this constant emotion. Shame retrieves memories of failure, inadequacy, and exposure become vivid. The archive of moments when one fell short arrives uninvited and begins building a verdict. Abandonment summons previous abandonment arrives. The person is no longer responding solely to the present event. An entire archive has entered the room, and an entire archive votes. So when you have an overreaction, someone that is reacting, seemingly overreacting to an event, this is something that has become a continuous program for them, a continuous event, a reinforced event. And it's reinforced by their memory. Fear activates. Previous dangers become present. Past experiences of powerlessness or harm become immediately accessible as evidence that danger is the appropriate perception now. Okay. So this always happens. That's the program, right? This happens all the time. Nobody respects me. Everyone eventually leaves. I can never trust anyone. The emotion has recruited biography. The individual is no longer responding to the present moment, and a pattern becomes the law for this person. How emotion recruits the future. Guess what? When you're recruiting the past, you're also affecting your future. Okay, because then something even more extraordinary occurs. The emotional state begins generating predictions. Point in case, talking about people that are intuitive, that begin to tap into information about the future that is very biased from past traumas that they've had. Okay, the past has already been recruited. Now the future is recruited. One emotional state has colonized psychological time. Prediction by emotional state. Fear imagines catastrophe. The worst possible future becomes the most probable future. Jealousy imagines betrayal. Shame imagines exposure. Anger imagines violation. Okay? Past, present, and future begin confirming one another. The past provides evidence, the present provides stimulus, the future provides confirmation. One emotional state has woven itself through all psychological time, creating a self-consistent world in which every dimension confirms what the emotion already knows. This is one of the deepest mechanisms of emotional possession, not merely a distortion of perception, but a generation of an entire coherent reality. The problem with this, beloved souls, is that this is working on massive scales, which is why your attention is so valuable to the system. Because when you are told that you are in danger and the whole world believes they are in danger, it completely shifts collective timelines. Okay, so take it close to home when you expect, problems, danger, pain, suffering in your life. This is what you attract because you expect it. You look for it. You confirm within your reality that that is true. Okay. And so what happens in the physical body, this reinforcement cycle, thought turns into physiology, then turns into sensation, then turns into confirmation. And the body is continuously responding in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. You're constantly in a state of stress, biochemically producing chemicals that are keeping your body in inflammation. And the number one illness, the number one reason beneath illnesses and any kind of systematic imbalance is stress, inflammation, which causes inflammation, okay, in the body. And we talked about how it creates identity, but the thing about this concept of identity is that we believe that this is who we are. We believe it. Okay. I am breaking down the construction of the matrix. These are the building blocks of a matrix. You are such a powerful co-creator of this reality. And this is how mind, body, and soul, biology, chemistry, physically, energetically, bioelectrically, this is how you become a powerful creator. But once we start to build our life around these choices and we start moving from fear or from shame or from anger, we are contributing to the collective of this. Okay, so I really want you to begin to look at that. You have such profound systems. You think, I'm unworthy, I'm unwanted. And we start to separate ourselves even more from source in such a powerful way that you isolate yourself in your own, almost like a psychosis, of a reality. Okay. Okay, and so let's talk about the energetics of that. Now we're getting into how it narrows your perception. What this looks like in the energy body, essentially, is that whatever is your core belief system emotionally, it's going to be affecting the chakra bodies. Okay, so as we talked about here, how a thought then affects physiology. Your physiology is very complex because it's the chakra system. Your chakra bodies are immediately reorganizing based on your emotional data. Every single chakra is in vivo responding to your emotional state. Just the way your muscles contract when you feel afraid, your chakras are also expanding and contracting in vivo. And you can move them and change them, expanding and contract them at will. Okay, but the majority of us are so disconnected from our body that we don't realize how these systems are so sensitive to your creation, your process creation. And so what happens when the chakra system, your chakras are the direct processing of your perception of reality. Okay, so your perception begins to narrow. And everything you start to see, just like that saying, he's seeing red. They say when someone's angry, oh, all he sees is red. He's seeing red. It's like your root chakra, which is your house of stability and safety and knowing that you're safe in your body, in your home, is super wide overactive, taking absolute control of everything that you see and how you see it. Okay, so it's extremely important to understand that these are triggering the gene markers in your DNA, activating illnesses, ancestral traumas that you are still holding on to from the past, because a lot of these things can also be passed down through generations. However, if it's passed down, you're living it now. Okay, there's no such thing as, your ancestral trauma is isolated from your current life. There's no such thing as that. Okay. So everything that you're experiencing now is things that you've been experiencing for a while. And so we want to interrupt that cycle. Okay. Something I want to be very, very clear that a lot of people confuse. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me come back to this. Oh, we talked about that. Okay. Something I want to be clear that a lot of people confuse that they think that expression of an emotion is a release of an emotion. Okay. And I see this misconception a lot when I see people talking about having, what is it called? Like scream parties. Have you guys ever heard of scream parties? Where they tell you, oh, we're going to go on a retreat in a mountain and we're going to summon our primordial self and we're going to scream all of our traumas out of our body. Okay. Or we're going to go and we're going to go into this warehouse with all these old things and you're going to grab a bat and you're just going to hit something. You're going to hit it. This is a major misconception. That is not how you process an emotion. It never will be, because as you can see, having physical force to release the energy of an emotion is not the same thing as processing it. Okay. And although biochemically, when you cry, you are actually releasing stress from the body, it doesn't mean that you are integrating an emotion. Okay. And this is really, really important because a lot of people, this is why they end up half healing certain pains and traumas of their past. They think that they've already expressed an emotion, they've already released everything, and yet it's all stored and suppressed deep into the subconscious, only for it to really come out again and again and again. And what I notice is that people that do this thing where they don't fully release an emotion, usually they live in that emotion constantly. They're always angry. It's always coming to the surface. Okay, so this is really important. Screaming is not integration. Crying is not integration. Confrontation is not integration. Someone in our chat the other day said, oh, I really wish that I could make my ex pay for what they did to me, right? And so those feelings are very valid, but when it actually comes to the integration of an emotion, having a confrontation is not going to be what is going to help you integrate that painful experience. Okay. Dramatic catharsis. Another thing I see a lot in these healing circles, people are having these catharsis, they're triggering these catharsis, right? They lay on the floor, they say it's a Kundalini awakening, shake your root, shake your sacral. It's going to release all the anger, all the pain, all the suffering. No, it doesn't. No, it does not release or integrate emotions. Okay. Ever. Because even though somatic movement is extremely important for the releasing and processing of emotions, the integration of the emotion is a very internal thing that you have to connect back with your body psychologically, mentally, emotionally, energetically to process the meaning, the understanding, the integration, gather the information, and apply the changes to your behavior, to your perception. You're not going to have a perceptual shift from a catharsis. It might bring some insight, it might release some of that information, but it's a whole different process. Okay. And what we often end up doing is reinforcing these states in the body. Okay. What we are aiming for is we want to understand it as more intelligently, harnessing the mind. The aim is not simply to discharge. The aim is completion and reorganization. Okay, so catharsis can provide relief, but the test is not whether emotion was expressed. The test is whether the organism has genuinely reorganized around what the emotion was carrying. Every emotion carries valuable information for you. And that is the beauty of the intelligence of this physical body and the experience within this matrix. Okay, this distinction is really important because without this distinction, practitioners risk creating cycles in which clients repeatedly access and express emotional states without integrating them. This is my number one focus in DNA reprogramming. Never leave an emotion unfinished without integration, because that is what changes the architecture of the subconscious. Okay. What does release actually look like? Let's talk about what it actually looks like. So the signs of true integration: genuine release may be surprisingly quiet. It is quiet. It's never going to be demonstrative or loud. It does not always announce itself. The body softens, breathing changes spontaneously, the narrative loses urgency. When the body softens, breathing changes, muscular tension releases without effort. When you're in the session trying to, and you gather the information, and you start to shift your perception, your muscles will begin to gently relax, to release. Warmth returns to your extremities. The jaw unclenches, the chest opens. You cannot fake that. Okay? You cannot manufacture that kind of shift because the body has an intelligence. Attention returns. Attention becomes available again for the present, for others, for creativity, for perception beyond emotional complex that previously occupied it entirely. This is one of the most valuable energies. What does this mean? That your toroidal energy system becomes centripetal. When your attention returns to your body and you begin to visualize the field around your body solid without any holes, it means that your attention has redirected to yourself in the present moment. Okay, so the self separates from the state. You can remember what happened without becoming who you were when it happened. The memory and the identity have been separated. The past remains accessible without reinstating the past self. This is the number one thing. That is the most powerful proof that you have actually integrated an emotion. If the place that you go, have you ever had a traumatic experience and you can't revisit a certain staircase that looks a certain way or a certain place because it brings back all those memories? Again, it harnesses memory. So if you're still pulling towards the memories of that past emotion, you have not processed the emotion. You haven't integrated it. Okay, so when you do integrate an emotion, you can watch the same thing that happened to you on TV. You can watch it to your friends. You can hear it in a story. You can read it in a book. Your body will no longer react the way you did because you have learned from that experience. You have gathered the necessary information to inform yourself on how to respond to that experience. That is true integration. And so when you experience that integration, your body actually experiences actual release. Okay. And so the returning of this life force in the body is something that is so powerful because this is where the human starts to access not only sovereignty, but free will. Okay. We talk about having free will. You don't have free will unless, number one, you know you have free will. Number two, you start to access free will, cultivate free will in your body by coming back into harmonic order, reorganizing your mind back into a regulated nervous system where your perception can kind of come from that 0 point into pure creative potential. If your creative potential is taken by past experiences, future experiences, fears, anxieties, doubts, you cannot create reality. You cannot create and manifest anything other than what you've ever known. Okay, so this is really important. It's literally the reclamation of your life force and the integration of emotional fragmentation. At the end of this entire being driven, manipulated by your emotions, being managed by these emotions, you cultivate the witness, which is the observer. And when I talk about creating emotional maturity is the person that can witness their emotions fully. Okay. And the cultivation of the witness, the decisive development is the appearance of an observer consciousness capable of remaining present during emotion. Can you be present every time that you are triggered? Okay. I just want you to just check in with today. What are the things that triggered you? Were you able to be present with your emotions? Or did you want to check out? Did you want to stay stagnant? Did you want to freeze? Did you want to play games, watch something else, go towards sex, go eat? What did you do to escape from the presence of your emotions? When we can witness and we don't suppress an emotion, this allows greater intimacy with it because consciousness no longer needs to become the emotion in order to meet it fully. Anger arises and we can say something sees anger. I am seeing this anger. Anger is arising, just like that quote by Rumi that says, I don't know it quote by quote, but sorry, word by word, but emotions are visitors. You welcome them in, they come in and they go when they're ready to leave. Okay. And there's a tendency to have a misconception that this is like control. You're being controlling, but actually it's pure surrender. Okay. The concept of surrender is not, what's the word? It's not a latent or I forget, I can't remember the word that I want to use, but surrender doesn't mean that nothing is happening. Surrender is a very actionable, engaged activity. It's a very, very full activity, full of your presence, full of your awareness. And it's emotional maturity at a much deeper level than control. Control manages emotion through suppression, distraction, or redirection, all of which require ongoing effort and leave the underlying pattern intact. Nothing changes, right? The witness position is fundamentally different. It does not manage the emotion. It provides a field of consciousness large enough that the emotion can fully experience, while identity remains larger than the state passing through it. And this is where you grow your field. This is how you expand your field. This is how you expand your perception. This is how you begin to be able to access consciousness, a unity consciousness, unity awareness. You can't embody unity consciousness if you can't integrate your emotions because, there's many layers that you need to expand your perception. Okay. So when you feel an emotion, here are some questions that you might want to ask yourself. Number one, what happened? Okay. Name the precipitating event as precisely as possible without interpretation. What occurred in reality? And this is true for when you're experiencing the experience in vivo or when you're going back to the past experience. Okay. Number two, what did my body do first? Find what part of your body contracted when you felt this emotion. Okay. What sensation appeared? Locate this sensation precisely. The position, the quality, the movement, temperature, weight, direction of travel. Direction of travel is really important. And I'll have to do another presentation on that because there's a really powerful intelligence with how emotions move through the body. And I'll share that with you another time. I don't know if it'll be in this challenge or not, but okay. And then what emotion did I name? So identify the label consciousness applied. Notice the act of naming as distinct from the sensation itself. Okay. What action did the emotion want? What did it want you to do? Did it want you to scream? Did it want you to slap someone? Did it want you to get up and yell? Okay. What happened? Okay. Are you trying to confront, hide, release, freeze? What story appeared? Observe the narrative that arose. Who was wrong? What had been violated? What does this mean about you or the world? What's the story? Okay. pull up that story. What memory joined the story? Take a look and see how many times have you experienced that story, that emotion that comes up in you? Does it bring up a childhood memory? Does it take you right back? Today, I had a really interesting experience where an emotion I had took me all the way back to being born and drinking my mother's milk. And it was amazing because I couldn't believe that I unlocked that level of a memory and all of the emotions that were tied to that first experience. And it was just, God, I don't even right now, what was it that triggered that emotion? It was something so simple, like something I saw somewhere, very, very abstract thing. But I always tell you that whenever you have flashbacks or whenever you have small memories that come up into your space, never ignore them because it means something triggered something in you. It means some emotion was triggered in you. Okay. What future did the emotion predict? Okay. So did it tell you to brace yourself? Did it tell you to protect yourself? What is it telling you? Okay. What identity appeared? Okay, what identity had to come to the surface in order for you to navigate all of these elements of yourself? What was the organization attempting to protect? Who's being protected by all of these systems? This is the most important question because you're going to find that maybe it was that little inner child that was not listened to or nurtured or communicated or understood. And therefore, you identify the need that you can then meet. This is how you create and complete the circle of emotional information. Okay. And when you meet that emotion, this is where you start to become sovereign in your experiences. And emotions are an event. I mean, they really are. I mean, they can be very subtle, little tiny triggers of emotions, but the level of weight that they have in your creation is so magnificently powerful. Okay, so I want to kind of jump into some of these because I'm going to talk a little bit deeper now that we talked about the whole process of emotion on the energetics of emotion and how they connect to your higher faculties. Okay, so we're going to go deeper into the advanced energetics of emotions. And I mean, there's many layers and many angles that we can talk about this topic. I'm going to jump to talk about the perceptual system, the perceptual organs, and one of those connections of intuitive capacities, because I'm going to talk about the many senses that we have beyond the five senses that are activated through the cultivation of emotional fluency. Okay. One of those things is that our organs, your organs in your body, are perceptual systems. They're perceptual engines. And it's really interesting because the microbiome is a second brain. It's a second or third brain. The heart is the second brain. The microbiome, I would say, is the third brain. But these different neural systems that we have are intercommunicating and they're passing information. So the more you practice the process of observing your emotions and the triggers behind them, you can begin to manage your senses on a much deeper level. Okay. And so, as you know, I talk a lot about this, but every single one of our organs is processing different emotional data. And I talked about how the direction of how emotions move through the body. This is one step in that direction because each of these emotional systems are also connected to elements because of their moving nature. Okay, some of them are more incendiary, some of them are more fluid, some of them are more, foundational, more solid. And so, depending on those natural connections to those emotions, our body translates that information differently. I'm not going to get too much into that because I really want to get into the senses. Essentially, when we cannot process emotions. Spiritually, how we become affected is that the Shen cannot fully govern a divided organism. What is the Shen? We talked a lot about this. We have three dantians in the body. And when we are disconnected from the Shen, which is it's the spiritual life force, we literally cannot embody that. And that's the severing of your connection to your divine self. It's not only that, but it's the severing to the all-knowing, to the field of infinite potential. This is a problem because when people disconnect from the field of all-knowing, we lose trust in ourselves, we lose trust in others, we betray ourselves, we are constantly battling for truth. We don't know what is true. We're completely confused. If you find yourself being confused on how to discern, chances are you're very disconnected from your Shen. Shen is not imagined just like a luminous substance descending from above. It's the mature meaning is revealed through the quality of consciousness itself: clarity, presence, continuity of awareness, radiance without agitation, perception without immediate identification, a capacity to inhibit the entire organism simultaneously. And this is part of becoming centripetal. What happens when you become bioelectrically centripetal is that you can inhibit the entire organism simultaneously. That is a sign of the embodied Shen, okay? Problem with fragmentation is that all parts become disconnected, okay? When the emotional field is fragmented, consciousness is repeatedly pulled towards local disturbances. One emotion takes the mind, another takes the body, another takes sexuality, another governs relationships. Different fragments require consciousness at different times. The human being, therefore, possesses moments of awareness without yet possessing continuity of awareness. You keep falling back asleep. It's very easy to fall asleep when you're deeply fragmented, okay? What does it mean to integrate Shen? Conscious presence begins penetrating territories previously governed automatically. This is a great definition for what it means to expand your field of light. Anger can arise while consciousness remains present. Sexuality can arise while consciousness remains present. Fear can arise while consciousness remains present. Okay, this is embodiment. The higher order no longer exists merely as an experience achieved during meditation. It survives contact with life. The higher self must become psychologically inhabitable in the body. One of the greatest misunderstandings of spiritual development is the assumption that access equals embodiment. A person may access extraordinary states: unity, love, expanded perception, profound intuition, silence, transpersonal awareness, and yet remain unable to sustain these states under rational pressure. Where access ends and embodiment begins. Yet the moment relationship touches abandonment, another structure appears. The moment money touches survival, another appears. Okay. The moment sexuality touches shame, another construct appears. The organism has not yet become capable of sustaining its order under pressure because we are compartmentalized. The descent completes the ascent. The mature path is concerned with how completely consciousness can descend into speech, into sexuality, into conflict, into money, into power, into grief, into the nervous system, into relationships, into the body, into ordinary life. The question is not how high can consciousness go, but rather how much consciousness can the human organism contain while remaining coherent. This is what it means to become coherent, okay? And the embodiment of a mature level of consciousness is the ability to connect all of these systems rather than being compartmentalized. The refinement of emotion. As consciousness enters emotional life, emotion becomes increasingly precise. Before refinement, anger can be destructive. It can be rage. After refinement, anger can become discernment. Why true power appears as simplicity. True spiritual power often appears externally as extraordinary, simple. Little energy is wasted in contradiction. Little energy is spent maintaining false identity. Little energy is consumed defending an image of oneself. Attention becomes available. The emotional body becomes transparent. Through that, consciousness can move through it without continuously becoming trapped within its contents. So you guys have seen the movies of, all the, I don't know, Jedis, these, amazing martial art masters. They're very stoic in their expression. And I guess in our Western world, we believe that power is like, muscles, big, powerful, giant, powerful guy that's just has these mega weapons and just, is just directing things and blowing things up. But actually, power is really soft. It's really silent. It's very still. It's very intentional. And that is something that when we learn how to come back into harmonic order, we reconnect with that part of that organized system. And how that looks embodied is a totally different thing. It totally expresses in a different way. Okay. So what happens as you refine emotion on this deeper level is that emotion becomes an instrument of perception. Emotions are at the root of your emotional system, your perceptual system. Once you start to reorganize your perception, you start to see truth. Okay. And you cannot deny yourself of the truth unless you're in denial. Totally different thing. Totally fine. You can experience that as well. But at the beginning of development, emotion tells consciousness what reality is. At a more mature stage, consciousness learns to read emotion as information. When the emotional body transforms from ruler into instrument, and an instrument can be exquisitely sensitive without becoming unstable. Reading fear, for example, is danger present? Is memory present? Is projection present? Is intuition present? Is the organism simply unfamiliar with expansion? Fear as information reveals what needs to be oriented towards what discernment is required, where sensitivity is pointing. Do you see how in your fear is locked really important data? Literally, your discernment is completely tied up in this massive system. Okay. Reading anger, what has been crossed, what truth has been withheld. We're so confused with all the massive amounts of information that we receive through social media that we believe that we're confused. But the more you disconnect from that, the more you can see right through all of that very quickly. The deception, the manipulation, it no longer becomes this manipulation of perception. Okay. So, for example, in anger as information reveals what boundary requires restoration, what dignity has been overlooked, what truth needs to be spoken. Nowadays, we're so confused, we don't know whether we can say what we need to say anymore. And the world is going to become more confused until it gets to that dire moment of awakening. Because every time that a system has to reorganize itself back into harmonic order, it's going to reach a certain point of destruction, self-destruction. Really, we are destroying ourselves because we lack consciousness, we lack awareness. Okay. And so emotion becomes extraordinarily intelligent once consciousness ceases obeying it blindly. The emotional body transforms from ruler into an instrument. So, let's talk about how it changes our perceptual field. Every state of being has its own geometry. I talked a lot about how the body, when we come into harmonic order, we are moving light like the Shen, it's moving through the body in a more fluid manner. It's a more self-organized, beautiful, geometric, symmetrical system of light. However, when we are occupied with a lot of emotions, it also interrupts that geometry in the body. Why do we want symmetry and fluid movement of light in the body? Because that is how you access and activate your higher faculties. Okay. And so we sharpen our perception of reality because all of these emotions are participating in the creation of our reality. When we refine emotional understanding, the body actually becomes the first organ of intuition. Okay. Before consciousness formulates knowledge, the body is the first one to receive the information. And this is the thing that we have become so disconnected from our bodies that we don't realize the intelligence of the body. This is why when, let's say, a person goes into a relationship with someone and they begin to realize that their body is really reacting in some ways against the person. They could have butterflies in their stomach, they could have anxiety, they could have nausea. And without proper understanding of your emotions, you might construe that as, oh, I really like this person. Meanwhile, your body is giving you all the red flags to run away immediately, right? And so we've lost such a profound disconnect with the body that we don't tune in to that intuition. That is, in a sense, a telepathic sensory communication that we have desensitized ourselves from. Okay, what does it look like when you increase this sensitivity? Eventually, one knows the texture of one's fear. Okay, when you start to feel goosebumps in this back of your neck and butterflies in your stomach, you know that that's fear. You don't confuse it with excitement or, just anticipation. Okay. The texture of desire is forward momentum. It's warmth. The texture of abandonment is hollow collapse. The texture of projection, it's urgent certainty. The texture of genuine incongruence, it's quiet, stable signal. The organism becomes increasingly legible to consciousness, not as an idea, but as a lived, felt, navigating landscape. For those of you that have trouble trusting yourself, this is the first area that you want to begin to cultivate and heal. That's why somatic, healing for the body is so important. Okay, so, yoga is, I was so surprised to realize that, I've been doing yoga for, very, very many, many, many years, but amazing how you're able to process traumas and emotions so much quicker when you allow yourself to, yoga has an interesting way of creating shapes with the body that target the release of certain energy systems and fascia, so does Qigong, right? So the movement of energy, you're moving energy. Emotion becomes a filter upon the multi-senses. In vision, the eye under fear does not search as the eye under love. It searches under fear. The visual field contracts towards movement, threat, relevant shapes, and it exits. Under love, it expands and softens, orienting towards faces and warmth. Okay, so there's an entire study behind this. Okay, how your body is responding to your senses. In hearing, the ear under shame does not hear emphasis as the ear under confidence hears it. Shame amplifies any tone that could carry evaluation or dismissal, filtering the rest of vocal information towards the background. When we talk about touch, touch received through unresolved threat may be experienced entirely different from touch received through safety. The same physical contact carries difference, valence depending on the state organizing the receiver. Space, even spatial perception and felt senses of a room, of distance, of proximity changes according to the state of the organism. A room can feel oppressive or expressive depending on the emotional condition presented within it. When we remote view, the more that you embody the 0 point, the more clear what you pick up from your remote viewing perceptions and impressions becomes. Okay. By the way, my remote viewing class and group is, let me just pull that up because I was just looking at that today. For those of you that want to practice remote viewing, which is really important, it's Thursday. Okay, this Thursday, 6 p.m. If you guys want to join me on training your remote viewing capacity in a really, really fun group, definitely join me with that. Okay, so let's go into the next level. Okay, when we talk about the expanded human sensory spectrum, we have so many hundreds of intuitive sensory systems in the body that we don't even know about. But let's take step by step some of the ones that are, known to us. Vision, we know vision. Audition, which is vibration, sound, rhythm. Olfaction, which is chemical information through the olfactory system, your sense of smell. Gustation, your taste, okay? And so the reason why I want to go through these is because your emotional system employs all of these, which is why the mastery of your emotional system is the mastery of your intuitive capacities. It's the cultivation of your ability to become telepathic, to remote view, to telekinesis, whatever ultrasensory activity you're learning or wanting to learn. It is through the connection, the deep connection and cultivation and refinement of these expanded sensory systems. That can only happen if you are fully in your body, if you're fully connecting and integrating into your body. Somatosensation, touch, pressure, vibration, texture, mechanical contact. Thermoception, perception of warmth and cold, is super important in energy healing. Okay. Nociception, which is detection of actual or potential tissue damaging stimuli. Proprioception, knowing the body position, configuration without looking. Kinesthesia, which is the perception of bodily movement through space. Vestibular sense, equilibrioception, which is balance, acceleration, orientation, gravity. Interoception, which is internal psychological conditioning, heartbeat, breathing, visceral activity. Visceroception, perception arising from the internal organs. Okay. Respiratory sensation, breathing effort, air, hunger, CO2, O2 regulation. Cardioception, awareness of cardiovascular signals, particularly your heartbeat. Hunger, satiating sensing, metabolic needs and fullness through neural hormonal visceral signals. Thirst, osmoreception, which is sensing the body's need for water and fluid balance. Like right now, drink some water. Proprioception, which is itching perception, distinguishable from pain. Chronoception, experiencing of duration and temporal passages. As I read these, can you begin to kind of understand how these are employed in your ability to perceive emotions and the meaning that you apply to them? Okay. Relational and integrative senses, right? Agency, the felt recognition that I am causing this movement or action. You will be surprised how many people do not have this. Okay. 20, body ownership, the experience that this body and these sensations belong to me. A lot of us do not have that. They have become desensitized. Spatial self-location, the felt sense of where I am located relative to body and environment. Super important to begin to cultivate not only telepathy, but remote viewing capacities. Emotional felt senses, integrated bodily apprehension of an emotional condition before language. Social perception, rapid integration of facial expression, gaze, posture, vocal prosody, and movement. Active resonance, empathetic perception, sensing another's emotional condition through one's own embodied responses. Intuitive pattern recognition, knowing before being consciously aware of the state of observations that produced the conclusion. Okay. Clairsentience, clear feeling information through bodily or emotional sensation. Okay. Claircognizance, clear knowing, immediate knowing without apparent reasoning sequence. Clairvoyance, clear seeing, inner imagery, symbols, visions, colors, spatial form. Clairaudience, clear hearing, inner auditory mode, words, tones, phrases, sounds. Okay. So I want to pause for a moment, because when you begin to cultivate intuition, you are employing all of these different systems. Some of you have some of these more cultivated than others, and that is directly connected to your trauma, and it's directly connected to your emotional learning as a child. Okay. And it is also connected to your ancestral trauma. Okay. What I have found over years of working in hypnotherapy is that most people that have one of these more active than the other are, those sensory systems, sensory organs are directly connected to the ancestral patterns that come down their bloodline for generations and generations, which is very, 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 very interesting. Okay. And there's a lot of people that are realizing this now in the scientific community, doing all kinds of research on consciousness and intuition and all of our senses. I've just, it's all over. It's going to be more so expanded into our mainstream, which is amazing. But those of you that are here already have a strong enough foundation to start to embody what you know. Okay. Clairalience, which is clear smelling, perceiving smell without obvious external source. Clairgustience, clear tasting, perceiving taste without obvious external stimulus. Okay. Psychometry, which is impressions about a person or event through contact with an object. Telepathic perception, direct apprehension of another's thoughts or intentions. I also have a telepathy training workshop. Please join us. It's very fun. We train our telepathic communication in partners and groups and as a whole, and it is amazing. It shouldn't be amazing, but it is amazing, because it's a constant reminder that we all can have telepathic communication. We do have telepathic abilities, okay? Precognitive perception, which is the perception of information concerning an event before it occurs. Remote perception, remote viewing, acquisition of information without distant or local target, about a local distant target. Energetic perception, perceiving chi, prana, vitality, biofield states, energetic densities. In another time, we're going to talk about how this is directly connected to the emotional body. I guess we're going to have to do a presentation on advanced emotional cultivation. But yeah, lots of fun stuff. Spatial, field awareness, sensitivity to the relational field surrounding the body. Okay. So again, we have, it's the same thing. We have just incredible capacities. Okay. Direct knowing, which is this noetic perception, is direct knowing which understanding appears as a whole. How many of you had downloads? Raise your hand. How many of you have downloads? How many of you have received incredible amounts of information? The spectrum moves: external sensation, internal sensation, emotional sensation, relational perception, symbolic perception, intuitive perception, noetic perception. This is the process of how we cultivate these highly advanced systems. Okay. And so, as you can see, doing the shadow work is the key to the cultivation and activation of these abilities. Okay. So, we already talked about that. Okay. Last two slides. Okay. Imagination is a higher faculty that can become captured by emotion. So this is like where we start going into next level of the higher faculties. Okay. But essentially, what I've noticed in trauma research is that people that are severely traumatized as children have a very hard time using their imagination. Okay. These are children that were gaslit. So, they said they felt something, and the mom said, no, you don't feel that. You don't feel that. Okay. So they have learned to mistrust what they feel, mistrust what they sense, and therefore, little by little, those senses becoming desensitized. Okay. Our imagination, when we don't have any connection with ourselves or control, is a tool for fantasy. It's a tool for, you can imagine creatively fantastical things, right? But for a mature embodiment of the self, the imagination is the number one most powerful tool in order to access, and it is the bridge between all of these sensory systems and the translation of information to the self. Okay. When we employ the imagination for intuitive capacities or remote viewing, you are learning how to activate the higher faculties. This is the activation of DNA. And so the imagination is one of the greatest creative powers that we hold. And when we are completely taken over by fear, we cannot fully extend our imagination. We cannot use it. Okay. Fear creates detailed futures that have not happened and may never happen. Jealousy creates a scene that have not occurred. We use our imagination for these fantasies that don't exist. Why? Because they are projections of our known limited understanding. When we use imagination for intuition, it's imagination combined with infinite potential, which is not limited by limited understanding. So it's a completely different way of employing this incredibly powerful faculty that we don't honor and use. Okay. And emotion is essentially this intuitive field. We literally can learn how to use this higher faculty and cultivate it to navigate this physical realm in a way of profound coherence and discernment. Okay. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. If you guys want to have the rest of these 64 slides that I did, you guys are welcome to sign up for the event on my website, and you will be added to the program. And I will be so happy to share that with you. But unfortunately, I've reached the limit of my stream. I hope that today has really helped you understand how to fully process an emotion, and that you understand the incredible importance of, fully processing an emotion where your power is held, your creative potential is held. Okay. It is just the key to unlocking your higher faculties on a really profound level. Okay. So I hope you guys are having an amazing night. If you guys want to join my remote viewing group, which is super fun, we always have a blast in it. Let me actually put the link below for you guys. It's on Thursday. What's today? I don't even know what today is. It's tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. It's been such a busy week this week. It's tomorrow. So please check that out. I'm gonna put it in the chat right now for you guys. Okay. So do you guys want to join that? All right. And then our telepathy class for those of you that want to join telepathy. And by the way, these are super hands-on workshops. So you're not leaving without practicing. Okay. You are going to practice with me. And for those of you that want to participate in the support group, in my interdimensional extraordinary experiences support group, if you have an extraordinary experience that you are needing support in integrating in any way, please feel free to sign up. That's going to be Friday. I'm super excited to see you guys there. It's always a blast and it's always incredible to learn and share with you guys. Questions. Let me get into the chat and see if there are any questions. Wow, so many people. Mark Sanchez, thank you so much for the super chat. That is so kind. Tremendous value in everything about you. Oh, thank you so much. That is so kind. I'm super, super grateful. Guys, your super chats are such a support to me and to maintaining this channel free. I put a lot of work into this and it's a lot of free stuff. So I do appreciate from the bottom of my heart your support. If you have a question, put it in capital letters. And I have only a few more minutes for this stream before it cuts off. If we do this work, Geraldine, please talk fully on abusers or attract. Okay. PJ, I think I already touched on that topic. If we do this work, others are not doing, so are we refining our frequency? What about our partners and family then? So, amazing thing about this kind of work is that once you start shifting and doing the internal work, you are absolutely shifting the collective. And it does happen through DNA. That's something that we'll talk about at some point in this challenge. But 100% our family, our friends, this entire system is being affected by your alchemy, the alchemy of yourself. And I'll get into the science of that when we get there. But yes, the answer is absolutely. Geraldine, why this work comes to some people, not all? Why didn't it come to me earlier? I felt I had cell in 2017 when you posted this, but I only got to know you in about 2023. Yeah, I mean, you see, the thing is that, again, we tend to think that experiences that happen to us that are traumatic are bad. But again, they are powerful catalysts to put you in a position where you are asking the right questions. Okay. So before you may have gotten into a certain event, you might have been asking different questions. And when you got out of that event, you're changing your perception, your values are changing. This is part of the human experience, it's evolution. And so information will come to you when you're ready to receive it, when you're ready to understand it. You know, when I was, I don't know, in my early 20s, I couldn't have imagined that I would be doing this in a million years, because I was in a completely different place. So you basically come into alignment with your higher knowing. And if you are accessing any of this information, you guys have had many lives of accessing this information. This is not new to you. You're just remembering what you already know. And that's why it resonates and it makes sense now. Okay, so we're moving through an evolutionary process. Mark, you are the best part of any night. Oh, you are so sweet. Thank you so much. Today was phenomenal. Thank you, Margot. Loves. Thank you, Margot. It's so good to see you, Grandizer, the best of Geraldine Orozco. Thank you. What do you know about how astrology and numerology relate to us in chakras, etc.? Oh boy. Ned M, we're gonna have to leave that question for another time because it's a really huge question. Because I talk a lot about archetypes and I talk a lot about the self-organizing nature of this universe in archetypal organization, vibrational frequency organization. Astrology is one of those means of studying those archetypal organizations. But the kind of astrology that I'm referring to is not the astrology of your zodiac necessarily. I'm talking about deep, deep universal astrology, which is a little different. But it's really looking at the connection of the body as a fractal of the universe. Okay, so your body, your chakras, every one of your chakras is connected to a planetary system. Um, Actually different planetary systems, not just the planets of this solar system. Okay, the planets of this solar system are a portal into these other more complex planetary systems, which are archetypally connected to the planets in the solar system. So this is where we start getting into the deep intricacies of your, starseed DNA, your starseed genetics, and everything that you are beyond that. So, yeah, there's an immense amount of information that we can talk about at some other time, but I know some about that. We can talk about that. PJ says, Geraldine, why these tools didn't come to me before? After using this, I feel what ifs or regrets for my past. If only I knew this, I felt my entire life timeline would have been different. Yeah. Yeah, again, PJ, you need to really be grateful for the experiences that you have. And you can only be grateful when you get to a point of, again, as I mentioned in today's presentation, being fully present with what you feel, what you've learned with the experience, to take the wisdom of those experiences. You don't want to waste that experience by not gathering and integrating the lessons that you learned from it. And so, also in our soul path, we're learning certain lessons from different perspectives. Okay, so there are some things that I had to relearn, let's say, over the past 4 years in a very deeper way. Things that I thought I already learned before, I had to learn them in a very, very deep way, a really, really deep embodied way. And so it changes your perception of everything. So allow those lessons, allow yourself to take time to review that. Okay. Grandizer question. Geraldine, how does the Kundalini and Kukalaka and the secrets of silence fit into your message? Does it, or is it something totally different? Yeah, the Kundalini, I mean, Kundalini means life force, energy. Okay. And so I think I don't follow the trends of Kundalini activations as they speak about them. I notice a lot of people talk about Kundalini activations as a process that happens, and it's an orgasmic process, and they link a lot of things to that. But I've read a lot of those teachings, and there's a lot missing there that you can only know when you go really deep into energy cultivation and shadow work. I don't suggest anyone to do any kind of energy movement separate from shadow work. I think shadow work is the key to any kind of energetic movement. When you, and this is, I'm saying this because before I knew anything about Kundalini, I was doing the shadow work, and through that shadow work, it opened up the pathways of my energy. And it wasn't about feeling orgasmic feelings or explosive emotions of any kind. I experienced those later but they weren't a big deal to me anymore because I had already integrated the emotional intelligence behind those things. Okay. So I think a lot of people stimulate orgasmic sensations in the body, or these kinds of Kundalini awakenings and openings, without fully understanding the deep emotional foundations of themselves. And then it turns into this, oh, a really amazing thing that happened. But we have 24 chakras. And so each of those are needing to become awake as well. So if you had one experience like that, it doesn't really say anything. You might have activated some abilities, you might have integrated some wisdom, but this is a never-ending process. And so, I do speak to that Kundalini process, which is the movement of energy, the movement of life force. I talk a lot about that. Okay. Kukala Ka, I don't know that term, so please excuse me if I don't know what that is. So I don't know. But yeah, grandizer, to answer that question, Alchemist Alexander, does it help more to come into heart coherence before processing, or does it help more to process from that raw emotional state? You can't come into heart coherence if you don't, first process the emotion, because hard coherence is, it's a system of regulating the nervous system. It's, in order to come into hard coherence, you have to regulate your nervous system. In order to regulate the nervous system, you have to be able to process an emotion. If you have an incendiary emotion that you can't process, you're not going to even get there. So processing raw emotion is always first. And eventually you cultivate heart coherence, mind, body, the three Dantian coherence as you integrate all of these emotional states. Nezio 88. Nezo 88. Hi, Geraldine. I'm glad you're still on this path, and I hope your health, wellness, and self love are ever expanding. Thank you so much. What do you feel happens to beings who are too attached to identity and stories? Yeah, we're actually going to talk about that in this series as a perfect segue from today's emotional processing. But the problem is, as I mentioned today, we become very limited, right? So we become identified, we get attached to those identities, and it creates a ceiling to your ability to go beyond that. It also skews your perception. It's just like you're telling yourself a lie. You're telling yourself you're something that, you know, you can say I'm wise. I mean, you're also other things. You're also messy. You're also beautiful. You're also clean. You're also disorganized sometimes, So I think the thing that we need to do is exercise our ability to expand our range of frequency, expand our range of perception, not only especially of yourself. And when you do that, you then can expand the range of perception towards the external world. And this is where you start to be able to expand consciousness, your unity consciousness. And all of those things can only come to someone that is willing to go beyond their limiting perceptions of themselves. Identities become a safe place. They become eventually a death because, we just keep repeating something over and over again. And we are designed to be constantly ever changing, constantly ever evolving. So it's really important to move beyond that. Okay. Yeah. Geraldine, please talk on cheating or cheated and how to heal when cheated, and what is the karma for a cheater, and what happens to the cheater. PJ, I believe I answered this question already, but we would have to break down those things into different elements because um, I guess archetypally the experience of cheating has to do with a void, first of all, a void, not able to fill a void, not feeling enough, not being honest about your resonance and your needs. Okay. So it's a multitude of things and programs that are underneath an act of cheating that you would have to look at. Okay. And if you are cheated on, you have to look at how you employ those behaviors in yourself. The resonance might be that you also have a void that you need to fill, and you fill it with the person that is cheating, right? And you become codependent on that person. That person becomes your form of security and safety. So you need to take a look at really deeply kind of breaking down what is happening, what happened in these several experiences, and how you are connecting or mirroring or perhaps reinforcing some of those behaviors in yourself. Okay. Yeah. Love, love, love. 333. I noticed the themes of visibility and not wanting to be imperceived. How to overcome this? Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Okay. So, first of all, you have to accept yourself 100% for who you are, your flaws, whatever you are judging. You have to become non-judgmental to yourself, but also extremely brutally honest with yourself about yourself in order to even be able to be authentic. From that perspective, like once you are able to access some level of authenticity, um, you then are not, your entire identity isn't based on the approval, the acceptance, or the rejection, trying to avoid the rejection of other people towards your authenticity. So it's really important for you to work with that. I think a lot of that has to do with your relationship with rejection. There might be a lot of things about yourself that you reject, which then become a trigger when others begin to reject that, or we feel the rejection of others. So that's something you would need to integrate in yourself, carefully. Yeah. And so once you do, visibility won't be a threat or a dangerous, quote unquote, dangerous situation. Visibility becomes dangerous when we're investing our entire sense of self on external validation, or we believe safety will come from the approval of the other. Okay, so you have to create a very safe place in yourself, with yourself, for yourself, in order to be okay with being seen by others. Okay, so that's one layer of that. Yeah. Geraldine, I'm grateful my paths crossed yours. Passing 4 years working with your resources helped me tremendously and understanding things at a deeper level and what's going on within myself. That's amazing, PJ. You are doing amazing. I'm so proud of you. I know that you have changed and integrated so much. You're amazing. Um, Alexander, to clarify, I'm asking, should I open heart to heal the root or just heal the root from where it is? Everything has to heal. Everything has to heal. You need to work with the root first, because if you don't, the root is your sense, your ability to even be in the body. Okay, so always start at the bottom. Always start at the base. Always start at the most primitive, hardest parts. Okay, you need to create a safe place. Actually, you'll find that once you heal the root, the sacral, the solar, the heart naturally opens up. That's why we go into reading state. Okay, when we create a reading state in the body, which is shrinking the first three chakras and opening the heart, the throat, and the third eye, we are teaching the body to come back into harmonic order by manufacturing that state in the body energetically. But if you are somebody that comes into harmonic order, you will naturally come into reading state. Okay, so you're temporarily helping guide the body to experience an energetic structure that it's not used to, which is what we do with reading state. Okay, but because most of the time people are like this. Okay, which is the sign of the uh, how they say in the satanic arts they're using the pentagram upside down. That's the whole meaning of that your energy is going to the material world. It's depleting out to the physical. So the inversion of that is the connection to the divine, right? And a heavy, nice, heavy base into the two points of the star that are holding the base of the five-pointed star. There's two legs on the ground, and then everything directing up, right? So that's where we start to create the Merkaba in the body. So to create a strong foundation for the heart to feel safe enough to open up, you have to create a safe home in your body, in the root, a safe enough interaction, exchange patterns, safe enough emotional creation, empowered behaviors, so everything is interconnected. Hi, why can I not stop my obsessive thought about how family have hurt me unless I am on ADHD medication? They are constant when I'm doing the dishes or vacuuming. Yep. Okay, so go back to this presentation and I want you to focus on identifying the emotion and going through that questionnaire of questions, because go back to that obsessive thought and the emotion that that obsessive thought is triggering. And you want to sit with that emotion and you want to open it up. This is what we do in DNA reprogramming. So if you need help, reach out to me, Laura, we can work on that in the session. But you can also, you have plenty of videos here, expand that emotion and understand the layers that are there to get to the root. And once you reach the root, this is where you can begin to expand the emotion at the root and integrate that. Okay. Find what is the need that wasn't met in that experience of that thought, that memory that keeps coming up. And next time that that obsessive thought comes up, since you've already found what you need, I want you to fill yourself up with that emotion. So let's say you didn't have enough self-acknowledgement, okay, self-love, and you're just going to fill yourself up with that love in that moment. You're going to help interrupt those patterns, because when we experience a pretty severe trauma, as I mentioned today, we are wired in many different layers to enact those behaviors of survival over and over again. Okay, so we're going to want to work on that. Why can I stop binge eating unless I'm on ADHD? Oh, okay, sorry. And the ADHD medication, which is the most important part, is that depending on what kind of medication that is, it's numbing down the part of you that is feeling those emotions. So, with the help of your doctor, if you can allow yourself to experience those emotions, okay, while the intervals of using that medication, you will be able to release what is there. The problem with some medications is that it's inhibiting that emotional response. And that's what some of those do. They inhibit the part of the brain that accesses that emotional information. Okay. And so that's why it stops. It's quiet there, right? And it numbs it down. And this is the same for my students that smoke weed for a very long time. What happens when they get off the weed is that they discover whenever they started it, usually it's in their teens, 14 years old, to suppress really difficult family scenarios. They are emotionally paralyzed at the moment when they began smoking the weed. And so we have to go through an entire lifetime of reprogramming back to those memories, unlocking whatever has been suppressed. And trust me, whether you're on ADHD medications, whatever medications, or the weed, or whatever it is, you are not avoiding the memory and the experience and the impact of triggers being recorded in your body, because those triggers have become an automatic survival mechanism and they work subconsciously. So what is actually happening is that that tension is accumulating in the body and it's being repressed more and more in the deep subconscious. Okay. So eventually, like, whether you stop the medication or something happens, it's all going to come back up until you actually address that information. Okay. All right. Lovies, gotta go. I love you. Thank you so much for your beautiful questions and for spending time with me, PJ. We will continue to be continued. Lots of questions. I want to thank you again for joining me, and I hope you have an amazing night. Bye.